So this is chapter 8, or chapter 8. This is session 8 in our End-to-End Thinking, the New Economics discussion series. So it's the last session in the series, and we're going to poke around in the appendix with the three worlds of suppliers, and then chapter 10 on profound knowledge.
Chapter 4, you mean?
Yeah, chapter 4 it is.
Yeah. Hey, Tim, before you get too far down the road, I think I threw you off. I said something about you should set up these meetings on Greenwich Mean Time.
Yeah, on the invite now, the last couple times it has had the Pacific time and the GMT.
Yeah, GMT is no longer being used. It's UTC now. And it turns out when you look up GMT, they say, oh, you just go refer to London time. But then London time also obeys daylight and standard savings time. So there is no fixed 24-hour clock, at least until you get to UTC. That's the only thing that's sad.
I miss Swatch's attempt at creating internet time back in the 90s, where they'd have where they had a fixed number that was the number. I think it was a minute number that corresponded everywhere.
Yeah, but I think UTC is now it used to be GMT, but it's now UTC for future reference too.
Well, I'm sure on the internet they'll have everything I need.
Yeah, there you go. I
When
know.
you look at the world of suppliers.
Just the time last week for the time change.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, sorry, Ben.
So Deming offers us 3 supplier worlds, and they're different. And the supplier, looks as if Deming assumes the supplier is part of the system, but the relationship with the supplier might be different. In fact, he has 3 different relationships. Do you think he's pushing to have you move all of your suppliers and the relationships to world 3?
To coin a phrase, I think it depends.
Yeah. Hey, Dirk. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes people get the idea he's in favor of all your suppliers being, single source and for any one item, and you having this intimate relationship. But when he describes World 3, there are a lot of obligations on behalf of the customer, you, if you're the customer, and your supplier. And if you, as the customer, can't commit everything you need to build that relationship, if you can't meet your obligations as the customer, you don't want to get in that world because things won't go well.
Yeah. Do you think, Tim, that there's that these 3 worlds are on a continuum of increasing complexity? Is that one way to think about it? Because the examples are, increasingly from simple, food in a package, a commodity, and then, other more complex products, presumably.
Yeah, certainly the relationship's more complicated.
Mm.
Well, right. I feel like, Stephen, you're already hitting on this, right? That it's complicated, right? For some things that a business needs, treating whatever it is as a commodity is the way to go. Do we care about the silverware in the kitchen of the office, or what refrigerator we're using, or the configuration of that part of an office? Or maybe you need to have a really complicated relationship with your snack vendor because your staff are crazy. But
I
like,
think,
and then there's maybe a limit, right? The World 3 is a high attention approach to working with your supplier,
Yeah.
right? And that high attention approach, maybe you can't maintain that with too many places, or I guess it depends on the size of your organization, how many of those you can support, right?
Yeah.
The government, I assume, has many, 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 many of these high attention relationships. But like in the company where I work for now, we only have a handful of like high attention like supplier relationships because we don't have enough people to support having lots of too many of them. It drains your resources.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess I worked in an organization that had that problem actually in the
Sure,
past.
sure. Well, if there's a big investment, relatively speaking, in a, getting to the level of quality that you need as a customer, there's greater motivation, I would think, to, attending to the relationship because you don't want to have to
Hmm.
do that again with someone else.
Right.
And presumably you've made a good choice of vendor in the first place, and so, maybe there's no one out there, but um, I think that's for me when I think about complexity and the way things can change and shift, and even your vendors are, they're affected by their other customers, for example,
Hmm.
et cetera. So, yeah.
I think it's interesting too. He talks about obligations, including you ought to send people, invite some of your supplier in to see how you use his product so he can offer contributions on how he might do things better or how you might do things better knowing his product. And he says you should get out and see what's going on at that supplier and offer him aid and assistance. And that commitment is costly in time and energy, but can lead to that. I mean, when you look at the Japanese car manufacturers and their suppliers, that relationship that many of them have built up with their suppliers over the years has helped them continually improve their cars. So it's been beneficial.
It's very difficult to define a hard boundary between the suppliers and, say, Toyota. They're so tightly integrated. There's so much bleeding over of resources going in both directions that there's a big, huge
Do
gray zone. Yeah,
do most of Toyota's suppliers only supply Toyota then? They have no other customers, or are there other customers, possibly other car
there's a lot of
manufacturers in Japan?
cross supplying going on.
Oh, right, I feel like we
And
have some of that among the American car brands, but they don't do this very well.
yeah,
Ford used to just own everything, right? It was all just one
right.
giant
GM too,
entity.
very vertically integrated. I think that's the
And
key.
GM owned Delco, right?
Right. They all their electronics.
Right, Boeing had outsourced all sorts of things to some external company when that whole door thing happened, right? And
Mhm.
now my understanding is that they're like reintegrating that or something.
Yeah, they're trying to bring everything back. Like Spirit Aero is, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's always going back and forth. But Spirit Aero used to be a Boeing division. They spun it off, and then now they're trying to bring it back in. And we went through an exercise with Airbus where they wanted to bring everything in-house. They wanted to bypass all the second and third, fourth tier suppliers. And they thought that would help them save costs. Every time you go one layer down in the supply chain, there's overhead stacked on top of each
Hmm.
other. And Airbus thought they could save some money, but it turns out it's not that easy. But you do
Well, because those relationships are very
integrate it to the
costly
next
to
level.
maintain.
Say that again, Ben. I'm sorry.
Those relationships are very costly to maintain properly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And they have
I
the
think
experience to integrate the things below them.
when you're the US companies seem to be looking to move stuff, looking to move stuff somewhere else because it could be made cheaper. But in that move, I don't believe they tried to build this kind of relationship where they were getting feedback on how they could improve their product, or how the suppliers could make changes, and they were accepting that and say, yeah, you should make that change. But to do that, you're looking at the long term, and it's going to be 5 or 10 years of a little bit of improvement every year. And if you only got contracts for 2 years, you're not going to invest the time and energy to do that continuous improvement activity.
Is that just a reflection of how we do like internal finance within companies, right? And so we're looking to get things like out of our books. Is this just a symptom of that?
I'm sure the financial system has a great influence on how the companies behave, because they seem to be more interested in the dollar amounts than they are in the quality of things.
Yeah, well, it's like the incentives, right? Like we talked about earlier, right? The purchasing department, maybe they're incentivized just to get the lowest cost, right? That's how their MBOs are set or whatever, regardless of the impact it does to engineering or manufacturing or whatever, it's kind of like, I think you're right though, Ben, like it's like the way that we're like cost above cheapest cost above all else is.
I think also it may have to do with like how we account for things, right? It's like right,
Yeah.
Deming talks about this a bunch. He's like, well, you know, you might have losses in your travel department, but the losses in the travel department are to make sure that people are rested when they arrive at customer sites or for meetings or for whatever. And you need to invest money, and you're going to lose money on the travel department. It's going to be more expensive than you wanted it to be, but that's okay because it is there to support all these other operations, and it feels like there's tons of places where this is just the actual problem.
Yeah,
And not every department needs to be a profit center.
Right.
yeah,
And I think part of the problem is, or part of the issue is that the finance departments are measuring things that are known and knowable.
Yep.
Because they can be measured in dollars.
Yep.
Right, exactly. At least they think they can be measured.
They do
Yes,
this job.
yes.
And that Deming has poked at that a lot, saying that the figures, the most important figures, are unknown and unknowable. So if you're using figures to make all your decisions, as he said in one clip I remember, you'll soon have neither figures nor a company. Says you've got to operate out of theory. And if your theory is, I'm better off spending more money on travel for an individual so that individual is rested and can do a proper job than if I get the cheapest flight at whatever ungodly hour in the morning it is. And when you're looking at numbers, yeah, you can see the numbers, but the numbers don't tell the story.
I'd be surprised that I don't think there's a high level of theory or operational definitions
No.
in accounting and in finance. Maybe finance. I don't think accounting.
Yeah, I don't think they're operating on a theory. And that's one of the keys with Deming. He talks about that's system of profound knowledge as a map of theory so that we can continuously learn. We've got a theory and we're executing and doing PDSA and getting feedback. And if you don't have that theory, all that evaporates, so you get no benefit. How about the idea? I'm sure this goes over big with the executives. How about the idea that your supplier bought all the material he needed to satisfy the order? You made a design change and all the raw material he bought is not going to be used, or a whole bunch of it's not going to be used.
Yeah, that's
That is-
definitely not going to that sounds like totally alien to any place I've ever worked. If your supplier makes some kind of error like that because you were like, "Oh, we're doing this thing," and they laid in stock because they're like, "Oh, we're gonna get we got a deal and we'll be ready for next year's orders," and they're screwed. They chose wrong.
Yeah,
Sucks to be them. And you wouldn't help them sell it. What he was talking about, either if you couldn't purchase the material yourself, at least help them to find buyers for the material. I can't, with their competitors, I can't even imagine like
Mhm.
this happening anywhere I've worked.
but that when you're looking at where Deming's coming from and his view of the world, that makes perfect sense.
It does. It does.
And it's an investment,
Um,
and you're operating out of theory that that's better than screwing that supplier and
well, if you, right,
making him
Deming is talking
eat the
about
cost.
investing all this time in making your supplier your close relation, right? So we're trying to cultivate this relationship. And so going and screwing over your supplier who you've built that relationship is insanity, because then they're going to always be like, "Oh, is the company like going to like screw us over in the future?" Like say they have no choice, they have to just eat it on this deal. And now they're always going to be like, "Oh, are they going to do that to us again?" And so they're going to be either looking to ditch you as a customer or like not investing as much in the relationship. Um, I liked there was another related piece to this. Right. And he was talking about how, oh, right. So your supplier has some kind of like catastrophic failure that makes it so that they can't supply what they would normally supply, and working with them to be like, "You guys figure it out and work with your competitors or whoever you have to, but we'll still get the things through you essentially, so that we don't have to like sort of break that part of our flow," which was really interesting.
Yeah, that's the
Why is it so adversarial, the relationship between supplier and company? Like, when did
yeah.
that happen versus
Well,
partner?
in World 3, you're making him much more part of the organization, much more interdependency than in either World 1 or World 2. It's not that there's anything wrong with World 1 or World 2. If you don't need that if the interdependency is low, then it's okay to go those worlds. But if you've got something where you've got high interdependency and you really can benefit from their help and they can benefit from yours, then you want to look into trying World 3. But he said, if you're going to go to a single source of supply or a World 3 relationship, you have to get prepared to do that. And you can't just jump in and say, "Oh, here's a guy, let's go to World 3 and set up this wonderful romance."
Hmm.
You've got to.
Cole, going back to your adversarialness question, I'm not sure why that is. Like, is that just a lack of trust? And right, like, is it like a trust relationship thing? I'm not sure.
Hmm.
Well, if you think about it, our whole legal system, from as far back as I can have looked at it, is adversarial in nature.
Hmm. Hmm.
And maybe that's appropriate because you're often defending people, defending an individual. So let's, let that go. But the notion of win lose, and having an adversary has spread to every bit of our culture, including the business world and organizational world. And it's I think that's part of what De Bono looks at with some of his methodologies and the rock and water logic and so on, and the six hats. Trying to get away from the this or that but simplified into yes and thinking.
Yeah.
You would rarely hear, I think, a lawyer say yes and it's like hell no, because the mindset, maybe that's what we're looking at here, is to win. The mindset is to win. And if that's valued above all else, then that produces a certain kind of behavior.
The oddly,
Grading, it goes all the way down to education, right?
Oh,
Back
absolutely.
to education,
Yeah.
to the, giving you a B or a C in, first grade or something, or grading you on a curve in elementary school.
And we know that that is not something that Deming was in favor of. He is
Right,
like,
right.
terrible, right?
Strong belief in the zero-sum game.
Yeah, all different ways of saying that same thing. Yeah.
yeah, and then Deming points out, and you don't see it anywhere near as much as you should, that negotiation is about the parties involved, 2 or 3 or however many there are all better off after the negotiation. There's not a winner.
Yeah.
Everybody's better off than he was before we went into this negotiation. If everybody's not better off, it's a failure.
We're not done yet. Yeah.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tim.
And I don't know how much of it's related to Alfie Kohn's idea in the psychology. We're very competitive in everything. So we're even competitive in negotiations, which is sort of defeats the purpose of the negotiation. It's not a competition. It's an exploration to see if we can end up, all of us, being better off.
Yeah. Well, Chris Argyris, I don't know if Deming and Chris Argyris ever crossed paths.
How do you spell that?
Argyris?
Yeah.
Ayrygiris. That's hard to spell out loud. Argyris. Argyris. And when he did his organizational theoretical work in the late 80s and early 90s, and he proposed these two kind of models for organizational behavior. And the one that Deming is advocating against, he called the unilateral, or Argyris called the unilateral control model. And some of the values there are things like it's important to win and not lose. I'm not going to express any negative feelings or anything that could reflect badly on me. I will always act rationally. I'm right. If you disagree with me, you're wrong, and so on. This is part of a very pervasive and persistent mindset in the organizational world. Fortunately, there's another aspect to it, which is the mutual learning model, which is relates very nicely to the things that Deming is considering. And I'm curious. I've never seen either of them refer to the other in what I've read. So I don't know if Tim has a sense. You remember, Tim, that John Bergstrom and I used to teach that workshop?
Yes.
Yeah.
Argyris, I like his work. I don't remember. I just looked in the index of Out of the Crisis. He's not called out there. So
Yeah.
I'm
guessing maybe not, that they were just in their separate, kind of worlds. Argyris was really very theoretical. He didn't call it the unilateral control model. He called it Model 1. It wasn't too creative around that. But some of you may have heard of Roger Schwartz, who wrote a book called The Skilled Facilitator and is still around and teaching and so on. He's really the current proponent or popularizer of Argyris's work, and he's got some great books that are very compatible with the kind of thinking we're talking about in our sessions lately. It's my go-to source.
Right. This is the last session, so I need to find new reading material.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
New
Our
reading.
this is good.
My next book on my plate is Quality as Organizational Strategy. That which I found out about from the Deming podcast. That's the next thing after this. I actually put that on hold to do this. So
What's intriguing to me always is when we look at corporations, especially for-profit corporations, and the things they do that Deming is complaining about. When we look at education and we look at nonprofits and we look at government, they're doing the same thing. And they don't have the same excuses, the guys that think they're in business to make a profit. I mean, Goodwill is not in the business of making a profit. It's supposed to be in the business of helping some people who might be less fortunate, but they still operate in the same manner that a for-profit company operates, with setting goals and pushing people to go after things and working to numbers instead of out of theory. I was in the school system and they don't work out of theory. They have
no kidding.
all over the place, and their numbers are incestuous. Give a kid a test in English or in math, those are the subjects I taught. I'd get the feedback on all these kids. It tells me what grade level they're operating at. That feedback is absolutely useless. He's up. Well, no, it's not. If he's in the 9th grade and operating in the 7th grade level, he's 2 grade levels behind. And I said, I don't know what 2 grade levels behind means. I don't know how to change what I'm doing to help him. I said, it's pointless. Collecting all that information is absolutely useless.
What do you think would have worked better? I'm education is one of my favorite subjects. I worked in educational technology and associated topics forever. So
Well, one of the
would you have rathered more fine-grained reading assessment that would at least help you know what are they having trouble with? But I don't even know how you'd build such things, right?
Well, David Langford,
Yeah. I've read a bunch of David Langford's work, and
he does something I thought was very clever. He takes what the school district at the top level hands down and says, for this class, this is how you demonstrate competency. These are the competencies you have to have. Then he works with the kids so they learn what the head honchos are telling the kids they have to learn. And then he helps them, identifies ways they can demonstrate those competencies. And they start going through at different rates. They're not all going at the same rate. And they keep a workbook. And when they get done with the semester or the year, they've got evidence of the competencies that they have mastered, so that when Langford gives them all A's and gets challenged, he says, well,
here's the evidence.
Work they did. Here's the work. Here it is. Said, you guys said these are the competencies. They've been demonstrated. Now, that's using the system to help folks do better. But the system's fundamentally flawed for me because it tells people what they have to learn. It sets up a curriculum and says, this is what you have to learn. Well, a whole bunch of people aren't interested in learning that. That's crazy.
Yeah, Ted Nelson had an interesting bit about this in a talk he gave. He talks about the way he thinks that a school should work is that you maybe have a giant list of things, and you're like, there are parts of this that you need to at least expose yourself to. So you have to do a little bit of foreign language, you need to do a little bit of math, and a little bit of science, and a little bit of English. a little bit of history, right? But you'd have all of these different subject areas, and you could tackle them in whatever order you chose, and how to whatever depth you wanted, right? And then he at the time, I think he proposed that the tests would be a thing that you went and took at Kinko's because it was 24-hour. And they do test administration to do the assessments and try and basically break things into small modules where the assessments can be like
There's a
fixed.
school Russ Akoff talks about, and one of his books has a lot of information on it. I'm trying to remember which one, but it's called Sudbury Valley. It's in Massachusetts, and they don't have a curriculum. And it's democratically run by the student population. You show up there and they continuously explain to you, you're responsible for your education. And that means you can go out and play on the swings all day and never try to learn anything. And they have staff that the students have input as to who stays on the staff that they can approach and say, I want to learn this. They can learn from each other. We want to learn this, and we're going to teach each other. And they come in sometimes as early as first graders and go on, and they leave when they feel like it's good to leave. When they first started going, one of the difficulties they thought they might face is that when somebody leaves there and tries to get into a college, they can't say they had 2 years of physics and 2 years of math and 3 years of history, but they all manage either to take a GED or some other kind of test to get in. And they also, this is the part that surprises me, after being on their own, responsible for their own education, they get into an institution that says, oh, no, we're responsible for telling you what you need to learn. And they manage to survive in that. It's
They've already
fascinating.
mastered the art of learning.
Yeah.
So whether now they're in a situation where it's structured, but the learning part is already embedded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a Sudbury, a version of that school here in Olympia a few years back, and I remember the son of a family that we knew, and he was kind of junior high level, I suppose, just to give you age. And he chose during one 6 or 8 week period, he said, I'm going to learn to be able to, take my bicycle apart and put it back together blindfolded.
Nice.
And he did that. And it
Wow.
was not not a two-wheel coaster brake thing. It was a competitive racing style bike because he was into that. And he wanted to know his bike so well that he worked on that. And that's what he did,
Yeah.
however many hours a day, and then other diversions, I would imagine. But
I want to imagine him at 16 in his junior year being like, okay, I'm going to disassemble my car and reassemble it.
well, he went on to customize BMWs and make
Oh,
them
nice,
street
nice.
racers, actually.
Mm.
I think he's gotten a lot of people into trouble with his fast cars, but yeah.
I went
Still,
through similar.
there's the talent.
My 10th grade year in high school, I went through a program similar to that. It was part of the LA Unified School District, but it was a little block of teachers and classrooms that was kind of off to one side of campus. And you just go in and you find a teacher in math or whatever and say, hey, I want to study this. And they'll sit down and spend one-on-one time with you. And then when you got through that, I said, okay. And then at the end of the semester, you grade yourself. How well do you think you learned the subject, or what do you think you deserve? Now, obviously, everybody gave themselves A. I gave myself a couple of B's, a couple of C's. But it's really loosely structured. I don't want to say I was self-motivated, but it really got me learning in a different way than I was in junior high. But then kind of the reality hit me then that I wasn't quite sure if being a part of this program, being a great learner or whatever, and this was before they introduced the notion of a GED. I said, I'm not going to be able to get into college if I stay in this. It kind of got me a little worried. So I jumped out, went back to the regular curriculum, but that 1 year of being part of IPS, Integrated Program School, really helped my thinking process, or learning process that set me up. I'd give it credit for setting me up for being a better learner through the rest of high school and through college. So it does work, but the world isn't always ready for that. And that was my concern, that would UCLA or any university accept my experience in this alternate high school program, be recognized as a viable, to make me a viable student.
What's interesting, looking back at my years in the school system, part of the difficulty, perhaps the biggest part, is not the students, it's the parents, because they know what they did, and they think they know what learning is and what has to be learned and all of that stuff. And so if the kid is doing something like you were doing, Yosh, the parents get upset. What the hell? You let my kid just go in there and decide what he wants to do? That's no good. You got to force him to do all this other stuff. It's the mindsets, the worldview of the parents who vote for the school board is trapped in what they've been through. They don't know anything different.
Yeah.
My parents just let me go to work with my dad whenever I wanted. It was amazing.
Right. One of the little extracurricular activities that I remember this one, the faculty of IPS invited some neo-Nazis to come and give a talk.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and it was enlightening, you know. Well, it was an exercise in free speech, obviously, but also just hearing them, and then afterwards we had kind of a after actions discussion within the students of IPS, and all that stuff was really, for me, it was really enlightening. You know, it wasn't hateful or anything like that. In some ways, it was like, take pity on these poor slobs. But this was the kind of curriculum, that's kind of the structure that we had. You could imagine in a conventional school setting, if they invited a bunch of neo-Nazis to show up and speak, what kind of hell that would be. But they were pushing a boundary in a lot of different ways.
Might depend on the community. There might be communities that would like to have a Nazi school.
It wasn't meant to be a good experience. It was meant to be an enlightening experience.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it was definitely to demonstrate, this is a really whack way of thinking.
Takes an enlightened organization to try and demonstrate enlightened thinking, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's just kind of like the background on my little 1 year and little alternative learning program.
Well, yeah, and it's a couple of things struck me too, is that the school system is based on everybody learning at the same rate,
Right.
despite the fact that the 2 years of preparation I had to become a teacher, they kept telling me kids learn at different rates. So do adults, as a matter of fact. But if everybody learns at a different rate and we set up a system that everybody's going to know the same thing at the end of chapter 1, and everybody's going to know the same thing at the end of the first quarter, and everybody's going to know this, that's crazy.
Yeah.
You have to accommodate different speeds of learning.
Yeah.
And it can be done. It's not difficult.
Well, right, but this is the general problem, it feels like, with mass schooling. It has been the problem with mass schooling forever, since it was invented in whenever that was, Germany, in the late 17, early 1800s.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Tim, but something opposite also happens too in a classroom. You have a student that has high potential, and the teacher spent more than their fair share of time focusing on that high potential student, because the teacher wants to be the one that helped bring this genius up, and they want it, and so the people who are for the students who are not performing well, they actually get ignored. They're the ones that need the help, but they don't get the love. The high pots always get the love, and the gap increases ever more because of that behavior. You know,
Yeah.
I don't know, Tim, when you were a teacher, did you see that happening with your peers, that the concentration of high pots always got a little bit more attention than the average and the less lower performing kids?
Something that slapped me right upside the head when I was teaching. 5 of us were selected to have a UCLA group come out, and over a period of, I don't remember how many weeks, they were going to watch what we did. And they just came into the classroom, and all they had was a seating chart. And the only thing we had to do, they didn't come into all our classes. I taught 5 classes, so they came into the same class every day over a several week period. And they just had a seating chart. The deal was the kids had to sit in the same kid, same seat every day. So these people didn't have to know what kid was what. And all they did is make a graph of who you interacted with. And they had this big graph. Before they set that up, they didn't tell us what they were doing. They said, hey, choose the 5 smartest kids in this class. Choose the 5 slowest ones in this class. So the data points they have are what you told them were 5 smartest, what you told them were the 5 dullest, if you will. And then at the end of the time, you looked at your spider diagram, at their distribution diagram, and discovered you spent way more time with those 5 smart kids and way less time with those slow kids without even realizing it. And part of it's what you're talking about. If you're quote teaching, you'd like correct answers. So when people raise their hands, if it's a smart person and a dumb person who raise their hands, you want the answer to be right, so you pick the smart person.
Because you've done your job as a teacher.
More learning takes place when you get the wrong answer and you discuss why it's wrong.
Yeah. So it does happen. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it was rather amazing how blind I was to the fact that that's what was going on.
There you go, Tim, contributing to the gap in learning.
Yeah.
Well, and that's
Well, it's not like the system you were within is set up to not cause that to happen.
yeah.
It's a management problem at the end of the day.
Exactly. I mean, that's so common that it's one of the, I don't know, 8 or 10 system archetypes that you'll find in Senge and other systems books, Success to the Successful. These are things we see everywhere, in organizations and society, and there's a few others, but this one in particular is very common. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It was
it drives
gap
the
just
need
steadily
for understanding
widens.
psychology.
Yes, exactly, Dirk. Yeah.
It's a nod towards that piece of the system of profound knowledge, understanding our psychology.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And that
Good
gets us
stuff.
back to chapter 4. Perfect segue.
Good. Good timing. I don't know how many of you, when you first got exposed to Deming's ideas, fell into this mode. When I was in school, I wasn't paying much attention. I mean, I knew how to manipulate the system to get what I wanted, but I wasn't paying any attention to really how it was functioning. And then when I got out of school and into college, I was looking, and I was still taking advantage of the system, but I wasn't paying much attention onto exactly what was going on. And when I knew things were wrong, and I knew how to make fun of the stupidity and mock what dumb things people were doing, but I had no idea how to tell them what they could do instead. And I didn't know what they could do instead. And I didn't exactly know what was going on, what was wrong. I just knew this was stupid in some way. And then I read the new economics and my light bulb went on and I said, I now have a way to express what the difficulty is and a way of expressing how we might alter what we do to deal with that difficulty. I don't know how many of you had that kind of a transformation.
I did.
I'm curious, how old were you when you encountered Deming?
Let's see, it was 1987, so I was 41.
Yeah, so I encountered Deming about what, 12 years ago, 13 years ago now. So I would have been what, 33? 33. And it really changed how I like saw what I was doing, like fundamental transformation. But I was writing something in preparation for today's session and realized that some of my core ideas that I was like, oh yeah, those came from Deming, that those were influenced by Deming. I was writing about those before I'd encountered Deming by like years. I'm so confused. So got totally confused about that. But it transformed how it has really changed. I was like looking at everything like through different eyes. I was like, oh, right, like, oh, these failures that we're having, we need to go and map them and make charts and figure out like how to improve it. And is this storm normal and stable? So, and it was super helpful, super helpful.
Yeah, what I was able to do with Deming's help and then practice working with others who are familiar with Deming over the years is start to ask questions that help people who haven't even thought of what their worldview is and the hypocrisies and the conflicts, the logic conflicts they execute. I remember asking some executive what he wanted for his kids. Well, I started with, what do you want out of your employees? I want them to be motivated. I want them to continuously improve. I want them to dedicate themselves to the organization. So, oh, what do you want out of your kids? Oh, I want them to grow up to be, smart and independent and contributors to the world around them and all that kind of stuff. And I said, okay, so how do you get your employees, how do you help them get where you want them to get? Well, I rate them and rank them and, hand out the rewards and the punishments based on the rating and ranking. I said, why don't you do that for your kids and hand out the birthday presents based on the ratings and rankings? You kind of want the same thing from both groups, but you use different approaches. Why is that? Well, you shouldn't do that with your kids.
Yeah.
Well, okay. How about with your employees? Why is it okay with your employees?
That's one thing I've noticed over many years of teaching different kinds of systems thinking workshops, basically the same material, but customized for whatever client. And that at some point during any workshop, someone will observe, well, I do this at home, but I don't do it at work, or vice versa. And there's always seems to be that separation to some extent. There's, some overlap, but there does seem to be a different perspective, on what we do in our lives versus what we do at work. And I'm not sure, what maybe the work environment is just so, there's such a dominant culture there that you can't resist it, but you might be doing other things. But just an interesting observation that someone always, comes up with that noticing.
A little bit like that TV show Severance. But at home there's a lot of heart. At work there's less heart, and maybe that's the distinction between how you behave at. You're emotionally invested at home. You're intellectually invested at work. Is there something there?
Maybe, but if we can create a work environment like Deming's talking about, where people can take joy and pride in their work,
Yep.
then
Well,
it's
right.
it's as emotional as anywhere.
Right. I
You
think
you
work
want to
is
be able to bring your whole self to work, but bringing your whole self to work is scary for a lot of people, I
Yeah,
think,
it
right?
is.
And you've never worked in a place where you've had that ability, right? And so you don't know
Yeah.
how to do that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then management needs to go and make it so that you can do that. And I don't know, I'm not sure most managers are prepared for that kind of like openness.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's what Deming frequently said when people would complain to him about managers. How could they know?
Mhm.
And the how could they know was a prompt pushing at you to say, you ought to be helping them know. Since you know, you ought to be trying to spread that by talking to them. So it was a subtle poke to send you out and say, don't just sit around and watch, go do something.
Yeah. And you know, even that, or especially that, extends to other aspects of our lives when you think about things like generational trauma. You know,
Yep.
and you know, how does a child who has had a traumatic childhood grow up to be a better parent? It's what they know, right?
Yep.
There's that perpetuation over
Yep.
generations. Same with poverty, other social phenomena. How would you know? You don't know anything different. You can't see other possibilities without something from outside your system helping out.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing that I picked up on the second time going through to chapter 4. Right, is when he was talking about having a way of being essentially outside of your system to look at it and using these as tools for evaluation so that you can put yourself into an outsider frame, essentially. Right, despite you being inside the organization, right?
Yeah, it's the outside view that's important. It doesn't have to be somebody from outside the organization, but it does have to be an outside view of the organization. And
Yeah.
that's what SOPK offers.
I think it's been a helpful frame for myself, right? Is that I've always, especially when I start new roles, I'm like, I'm going to try and keep my outsiderness as long
Yeah,
as I can.
yes.
But I want to say the best I've ever been able to do is to keep it going for like 2 years. It's hard past that.
Mhm.
I had a fun conversation with someone. He's like, yeah, after a year, you're part of the problem. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think I told you guys, I got worried about that working with the VP of quality and told him one day in his office, I thought I might be becoming too much part of the system. I don't think I'm far enough outside. And he looked at me with a funny look and said, you're plenty far enough outside.
What a compliment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the valuable lessons I take away from some of the conferences of the Intuit forums is, Joel and Michelle Levy's sessions, where they talk about being aware, self-aware, being present. And then one of the things I try to practice when I'm in discussions with other people, I said, well, I know what I'm saying. I check myself, say, okay, now put yourself in their shoes, and what do you think they're hearing? And that forces me to think outside myself, even put myself behind their filters. If I know them well enough, I can do that. And then I said, so am I as the other person, hearing what me, the presenter, Yosh, is throwing out there, or what I want to throw out there? And that helps me to calibrate a little bit. But, if I just sit there and say, this is what I want to say, I don't care what you got, I don't care how you perceive it, but you better perceive what I'm saying to you. Well, that's no way to communicate. You have to have a closed loop system in communication. One way to do that is try to crawl inside the other person's head and try to see yourself through their eyes. And I had a lot of pretty good interactions that way. Developed a lot of good working relationships by doing that.
I can't remember whether it was Barbara Lawton or Ron Moen, one of the other people who was working with Deming told a story where Deming came after the fourth day of the 4-day seminar. He does his part, and then they do their part, and he does his part each day. At the end of the 4 days, Ron or Barbara or whoever asked him, "How did it go?" And he said, "I know what I said. I don't know what they heard."
Yeah.
Yeah, that feels like the maybe the biggest challenge that I'm having with Deming's work, or have had with Deming's work. I feel like I'm finally understanding it now after a decade. It's starting to make sense. I think a decade plus what 100 episodes of the podcast or something, right? It helped like fill in lots of gaps and help me understand it better. But I feel like Deming's language and his like desire for precision in his words makes a lot of what he says actually very difficult to consume, because he has a very, very, very specific idea of what this word means, and my understanding of that word doesn't match. And this feels like was the actual problem I've been having with his work all this time. And so now that I've read his work plus a lot of like adjacent work, it feels like it's all starting to like mesh together, and listen to a lot of stuff too. Feels like it's starting to all mesh together and gel together. It's filled in the gaps. So,
Well, what were you doing before you jumped into Deming, or what led you to Deming, Benjamin?
well, I discovered Deming, right? I work in release engineering, or developer productivity. So I help other software engineers be more productive. And
Yeah.
my approach to that has always been, what kinds of problems are they having? Let's make the feedback loops faster, right? So they can find out like what problems they're having with their code and things like that. And I started looking around for like other approaches to like organizing that and other techniques that might be helpful. And there was a passage in Eric Ries's The Lean Startup talking about Deming, like 2 sentences,
Okay.
talking about that as being like the like work of some of the lean parts that he was talking about. I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. So I went and I ended up stumbling across Deming through that means, through that mechanism. And I was like, oh, there's all sorts of useful stuff here. I wonder how to apply it. But it was very hard to apply because I didn't understand very well what was going on, right? But control charts and things like that were helpful and valuable. And thinking about system, which I already had a fairly decent grasp of for my work, and like using that to try and help me like improve how I help developers in my organizations.
Yeah.
I like in this chapter 2, he lays out 4 kinds of psychology we're dealing with: the psychology of the individual, the psychology of the group, the psychology of society, and the psychology of change. And we're dealing with them all at once because we're asking for change. So we got to deal with the psychology of change. We're dealing within a society, we're dealing with groups and individuals. And he points out that, a whole bunch of what happens, the psychology of nobody wants to tell a leader the bad news. They'll tell them the good news, but they don't want to tell them the bad news. So sometimes the bad news either gets left out or somehow turned into good news. And that psychology is there, and we know it's there. And it doesn't make it go away just because we know it's there. But when you have the insight that that's a psychological action that happens, you can start to make judgments about whether it's going on in this particular event. Is this a case of bad news running up the chain of command at each level, or is this something real? But that idea of four things we're looking at: individuals, groups, society, and change. And it's the psychology of those things. And then I also like in this chapter, he points out over and over again that, you know, knowledge of psychology is incomplete without knowledge about variation. And the same with the others. Knowledge about systems is incomplete without knowledge about learning, and et cetera. The whole thing is very interdependent.
Well, I think that interdependent is what makes adoption of this approach challenging, right? Is that there's just a lot of moving parts, right? Right. Stephen was like, that's the complexity in chat, right? There are just so many moving parts to this that is, and you can't actually like tease out. You can't just be like, well, I'm just going to do the variation piece. We're just going to do that. You can get some value out of doing that, right? There's benefits to like knowing that, but without all the other parts, you come up short. I guess what Lean is like, or Six Sigma is do just the variation part.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the thing about interdependence, at least in my view, is that it's not something we choose or, think of as, oh, I think I'll work with interdependence today. It's a fact of life, whether we choose to
Yeah.
do it or, quote, do it or not. It is. It's a thing. And you ignore it at your peril, whether you're a manager or a parent.
And the system of profound knowledge is giving you that lens so you can have the outside view and that map of theory so you can look at, maybe you're looking at variation, but you know that just looking at the variation isn't going to be valuable. So you're looking at what's the psychology, what kind of variation is it? What's the psychology? What's a system? What is trying to be learned? And you try to see things from that outside lens viewpoint and which offers you opportunities to make judgments and suggest possibilities. Doesn't guarantee any possibilities are going to come to fruition, but you have a much better chance of seeing something that can come to fruition if you're using this lens.
For the interdependence piece, I know. So does Deming? Where does Deming? And I apologize, I'm late. I had a meeting with somebody here, but the interdependence thing kind of intrigues me because it's such a powerful thing. That's kind of right. It's all between. It's between the lines. It's all this stuff, but. Can we talk, like, where does Deming, is there somewhere in Deming, and I know that's kind of what we're talking about here, is how do you get Deming's work? How do you become like, right, a systems thinker or integrate this so it's whole? And it takes, I think, Ben, you said it took you 10 years kind of to get it or something shifted. I'm not sure where I'm at, frankly, but I'm just curious what you guys think about, where do you hone in? Maybe it's in the new economics. Is there a chapter or a section where he really kind of gets to what at least Deming's view on the interdependence piece?
I think this is the chapter. He says things like, you could be looking at the variation. There's always going to be variation between people. That always happens. So now you ask the question, what is the variation trying to tell us about the system, about the people that are working in it? That kind of thing is what you're looking for. Not just the variation by itself, not just the psychology by itself, not the system by itself. You're saying I'm getting you can enter this from any one of those boxes, and then you go to the other boxes as needed or as it seems appropriate. You certainly ought to consider each of the other boxes and then decide which ones you want to focus on.
And then you just spend a lot of time sort of rolling between them over time, right? Right. I started out with a big chunk in systems already. I then worked on variation for a while. I built out in psychology, and now I guess I came with a lot of knowledge like theory also because of my work in the past. But and then I've just been rolling back and forth between these four topics, and then rediscovered Deming in the last year, and was like, oh, I've picked up a bunch of pieces that help with this and make more sense to me now.
Yeah, and you get things like I was in charge for a long time, what they call cause and corrective action, which means when something goes awry in the organization, a part gets dropped or get built wrong or whatever the deal is, they want to go find out causes and take corrective action. And one of the things that I was able to help people grasp, partly because I was exposed to Deming, is that when they study causes, they'd be looking at this happened, that happened, that happened, and Tim made a mistake. And they'd stop there. And I said, I tell them, if you don't know why the person who made a mistake, what the things are that interacted to create him making a mistake, then you're never going to eliminate whatever this cause is. If you're claiming that mistake was because Tim is Tim, you can't fix that. But Tim did what he did either because he's an idiot and you hired an idiot, which means your hiring process sucks, or he didn't understand something because he wasn't trained well enough. That you can't treat human error as a cause. Yes, it's a cause of something, but it's an effect, and it has causes, and those causes need to be studied.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, after 15 years or so, longer now, they're still doing it, but after probably 5 or 6 years, I got them to go beyond Tim made a mistake to the lower tiers and start to learn things.
Yeah.
And quit
So Tim
blaming
got
the
something, so we
people.
send him to training, and we used to always call training the corrective action of last resort.
Yeah.
It really doesn't solve
That's
anything.
the other thing it used to frustrate me. They get down and they say, well, training is the problem. And I said, great. What was wrong with the training? What do you mean? So he said, training's the problem. What was the problem? Bad materials, bad teacher.
No, Tim slept
You
through it.
didn't test
Bad
this.
students, yeah.
You didn't test to see if he learned anything. What,
Yeah.
you know what?
The most
Oh, we
important thing
never
out of any
test them.
training
Well,
is a sign-in sheet.
okay. You don't test them, then you can expect mistakes. Even when you test them, you can expect mistakes, but fewer.
Yeah. But if the system is fundamentally broken, then training doesn't change anything. But,
Yeah.
and like I said,
Well,
the most important thing out of any corporate training that I ever attended was the sign-in sheet. Because that was the record that says the company did our part to protect the parts. Now it's because the company's done our part, we're not liable, but Tim is because he
Yeah.
went to the training, but he dropped the part anyways.
Yep.
what I'm hearing is that search for the cause, they're ending, right? That's the feedback loop. Tim and some other examples are they find something to blame, right? Preferably a person, right? Because for whatever reason, psychology, like, I'm not saying every culture, right? Because I'm not quite convinced. I think somehow we've been brainwashed or trained to have these systems the way we think, but they find the cause, they blame somebody, and then they kind of wash their hands and move on, and they think they solved it, but the loop is closed. Whereas I'm hearing there's something about, in a way, there's infinite loops in some of this, right? Like if you keep, I don't know, is the way I'm saying this is like,
What you find, if you find somebody who's made a mistake and you start instead of first blaming the person, you say, let's look at the system that he's operating in. How was he trained? Well, how do they know he was trained? How does his training relate to what he's doing? Does he get enough time to practice, et cetera? You start looking at all those things, and then you can get to a point where instead of blaming the individual, you can change something fundamental in the system, which not only helps prevent the problem you're studying, it helps prevent problems that are going to happen because of that same functioning going on in another part of the organization.
Yeah. Can I give an example of that?
Sure.
At a manufacturing facility, we had one of those milling machine, NC controlled milling machines, and the operator, if you just push the button, the operator can walk away. The thing should run itself. And milling a titanium part, the guy, because it's a CNC machine, the guy could walk away from the machine. It shouldn't be a big deal. He walked away, went outside, took a cigarette break, and in that meantime, this thing was cutting titanium, and titanium can be very flammable given the right circumstance, especially when there's cutting fluid and everything else. And of course, the machine caught on fire. And what was the root cause? Well, the guy shouldn't have gone out to take a cigarette break, right? So that's, you discipline the guy, problem solved. He's not going to go take a cigarette break anymore. The real cause of the problem was because the company was cheap, or they tried to get as much mileage out of the cutting bits as possible. And so eventually the cutting bit got dull. The duller the cutting bit, the more heat it creates. The more heat it creates, the obvious thing that next happens. So in order to save a few bucks on replacing bits before they were absolutely necessary, they ran it out as far as they could. And that was a situation where human behavior and the obvious thing coincided. And instead of blaming the fact that it was a dull bit, blame the guy, and let's keep saving money on these titanium cutting bits and try to get as much mileage out of them as we could. So, that, again, back to you, Scott. You blame the person, you don't blame the process, because changing the process means that somebody at a higher pay grade might be responsible, and you want to blame the people at the lowest level. That's how organizations sometimes work.
What's interesting when you look back at that, you see the psychology. I remember in this one, they fired a guy because he screwed up and made the same problem, like 2 days after he'd been sent home for screwing up in the first time. And I started asking questions, and they sent him home for 2 days or 3 days. So the guy's mad that they sent him home because he probably felt trapped and had, it's not as if he went in there to screw anything up. Then he came back, and when he came back, instead of either trying to retrain him or ease him back into the job, they just put him right back to the exact same job. Yeah. And he did the exact same thing, which is take a shortcut that he thought was a reasonable shortcut to make something happen. And so they end up firing him. And I'm saying, firing people isn't the solution. The solution is we got to go find out why this guy thought he needed to take this shortcut, and this was a valuable shortcut. So something's going on there.
Yeah, he was probably also under pressure to pump out as many pieces across that machine as
exactly.
So
yeah,
that pressure.
That's very good.
That's part of the system too.
Yeah, that's the variation and the psychology kicking in. And frankly, in a whole bunch of cases, we're sort of in the dark whether the thing that happened was a special cause or not. And almost everything in an organization that's severe enough is treated as a special cause. It's really hard to get them to move away from that being something special and helping them grasp it's not special. This system is going to produce that periodically in different parts of the organization. And getting rid of that person or training the hell out of that person or anything else isn't going to help. You have to figure out what thing in the organization is acting that generated the conditions that led up to what you didn't like, and then go back and figure out how you can change the system so that doesn't happen next time around.
But there has to be a willingness to want to
Yes.
do that, right? Like, because you're talking about, I don't know, Stephen was posting, and I'm looking, trying to keep up, double learning and like knowing, right? Like
Yeah.
I think there's something in Zen. It's probably almost a cliche now, but there's like knower's mind, beginner's mind thing where if you know, right, it's pretty much you're closing the loop, you're stopping. And I'm sensing that the bigger systems that we're operating in, they know, right? Like you were saying, you
Well,
give 1,000 examples. The parents know because they went through it, what their
Yeah.
kids are going, right? So as soon as that happens, but I'm just curious
well,
because it
they
seems
think they
like,
know,
well, exactly. I'm not saying,
right?
so when I say no, I put in scare
Yeah,
quotes because
with
you can
quotes.
read lots
Yeah.
of people who were actually those people who were really transformative. And and maybe some of them are right revolutionaries. You know, they don't know. They don't, and that's it's a scary place to be, but
Yeah.
that's and yet how do you I think I know the answer. You have to have enough people, or at least enough people in your department or somebody, even one person who's willing to go beyond that boundary of knowing whatever that is. Otherwise you're just stuck in a system that's going to keep firing people, and it's not even their fault, which is the kind of the sad
Yeah.
lesson or thing we learned from the beads, right? From the red beads experiment.
Well, right, in the going back to our education discussion from earlier, right, I was listening to an Eric Hanushek interview where he is basically like, "Oh, teachers is an innate skill; it can't be taught, and you should just burn through staff to find teachers who are good," and that's insane. That is insane, right? Um, and it also reminds me a bit of Amy Edmondson's work. She wrote a book called The Fearless Organization, but I feel like right, she talks about what she calls a learning frame versus an execution frame in an organization, and the execution frame is the organization knows what it's doing and we don't need to learn, right? We know what we're doing, we don't have to think about it, and we can just go do things, as opposed to a learning frame where you're just always like reevaluating like what's going on and trying to figure out what best to do. And I've just I don't know how, I apparently don't know how to function in an execution frame environment because I bring a learning frame wherever I go. So,
Yeah, and that can be in conflict, right? Because when you're
oh,
with a bunch of
totally in conflict.
knowers, right, you don't fit in, and
No,
that's
I don't
where
fit in.
you're right. And I know I run into that too, is where you want to be open, but then they're expecting, right? In fact, we have a culture of model of leaders, right, where you have
Yeah.
the answers, not in all of them, but I don't know. Maybe some of you have seen cultures or leaders that don't know, have the answers, and somehow they're able to rally the team around, the answers emerging from the team. I see that, but it's pretty rare, right? That kind of
Yeah.
learning. I
It's
don't know.
less rare in a Deming organization. You go to a place like Peaker, you're going to see that. I visited in Campinas, a company Bandagi, which makes big wheeler treads for all the cars. It's a German company, and the German guy that founded it got exposed to Deming's work and decided to transform Bondag into a Deming-like company. And what was going on in Campinas near Sao Paulo when I went in and visited them was way different from what's going on in the U.S. and even more different from what's going on in Brazil, because they sort of take their their ideas, a lot of their ideas on business from us. So it's different, and you can see the difference. It's not all that subtle. When we walked in, it was like 10 o'clock in the morning. There were 5 guys that probably had machines to run, that were in an area where they could get coffee and snacks and stuff. And the guy that was giving me the tour says, those guys will go back to wherever their work area is when they need to be back in that area. In fact, they may be here talking about a problem, or they may be here just interacting with each other. And another thing he told me, which was interesting, is there's all this carbon black that's in the factory all the time. So as we were walking, he says, don't use the handrail because your hand's all black and nasty. And he said, by the way, the first week we were working, we had the employees, we gave them coverage for their clothes so they could come in, and they had the smocks on and the headgear so they didn't get carbon black all over themselves. But then at the end of the week, they took those smocks home and washed them. They came back the next week and said, and complained that when they washed them at home, then there's all this carbon black in their washer, and they have to do a bunch of washing and extra things without the clothes in it to get rid of the carbon black. So then they immediately instituted, okay, at the end of the work week, you dump all your stuff here, and when you come back, the beginning of the work week, it'll be clean. And so the company took care of it.
Yeah.
That's way different from what happens in most organizations.
That's Spain, Campinas, Spain.
Campinas, it's a town, I don't know, maybe 40 miles from Sao Paulo, toward the
In
interior.
Brazil.
Brazil.
Oh, Brazil. Okay.
Sao Paulo,
Right.
Brazil, yeah.
Do you think that Brazilian, I'm just kind of stepping back from the company inside Brazilian culture, is there something in that culture that you see makes it more a
No.
fertile ground for Deming
No,
company? No?
it's fertile for being transformed. When you go into most organizations, especially 30 years ago, I remember her mom was within walking distance of 2 different bakeries, and she didn't like the way one of them was treating her. And I asked Ileana, I said, why didn't she just go to the other one? And she said, because Brazilians believe it's going to be the same over there.
Yeah.
So having better service isn't a competitive advantage, and so nobody strives for it. And then the other thing is they think their employees are stupid, so they don't train them and give them any responsibility. So when you go into a store, I like cachaça, it makes a really good caipirinha drink I like. So I go into a store and I say, where's your cachaça? And, they'll be looking, I'm not sure, they don't know. And when you ask them a question, frequently they can't answer the question, and you have to get a manager around to come down because they only trust the managers to have the knowledge they don't share with anybody else. It's crazy.
That doesn't sound that different from most businesses in the United States.
Enough
Yeah,
of
but
them anyway. Yeah.
it's unbelievable.
Yeah. Check your brain at the door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Check your soul at the door too, right?
Yeah.
You got to be a robot.
Mm.
So he reminds us that the idea of stable, special causes and common causes, that the most important application of that is in the management of people. if the system's not stable, you certainly can't be blaming the people. And if the system's stable, you can't be rewarding one against another.
I have a story to share with everybody, but I'm hesitant to with the recording. But I had a work experience directly related to this group.
We could stop the recording here.
Well, we have at least 6 more minutes, but I just wanted to throw that out that maybe we could at the end stop the recording and then
Sure,
share a work experience.
sure.
Red pen experience for those of us that know
Oh,
the red and blue pen analogy.
That when talk about knowledge and what we know, the knowers are problematic. I remember Bill talking to the executive here, and the executive was saying, well, you know, are my guys, the guys that report to me, getting it? And he said, and Bill says, well, not many of them are coming to class. And he says, do I have to make it mandatory? And he says, no, don't make it mandatory. Just tell them you think it's important and let them go by their way. And he says, well, you know, if they don't know, you know, how can they take action? And Bill said, the problem is not their ignorance. The problem is they're not interested in learning. They already know.
yeah. I was reminded of one last thing that I wanted to discuss. I was surprised. I guess I didn't notice or missed his reference to Drucker in this chapter the first
Yes.
time through. I read Drucker a long time ago, and I have always felt like Deming and Drucker are not aligned at all, but it really actually sounds like people just misunderstand Drucker, and they're actually more aligned than people realize.
Yeah, frankly, I think Deming is being rather kind to Drucker because I've read Drucker and I don't get the distinction. Deming's making a distinction saying, you know, Drucker accounted for the system and other things when you're looking for management by objectives, but I didn't really see anything there in his work. And certainly I don't see anything in the people who use that has any inkling to what Deming's talking about. It's just you put out a target, a goal, or whatever you want to call it, and then you push people to achieve it, and then you come back and see if it got achieved. And that somehow is a way to make progress and make things better. And frankly, it doesn't necessarily make any progress, and I don't see how anything's getting better by doing that.
Maybe it's just that he knew. Did they know each other personally? I assume they'd met.
They I don't know how much they worked together in Japan. They were both in Japan,
Ah, okay.
but I don't know if they worked together at all. They certainly knew of each other's work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now that we have a lens and a map, we can go off and start making transformations. Probably don't want to start really big. Bill Bellows, when people used to come to the classes we offered here at Rocketdyne, outsiders from Rocketdyne would come to classes, and we recommended that if they were going to come, bring somebody else, at least one somebody else in their organization. Because if their light bulb goes on here and they go back and start talking about it and nobody else understands it, they just get looked at like they're from some other planet. And so you need a couple, two at least, and maybe three, so they can in essence, commiserate and try to do things together to help spread the word.
Yeah, it's the same for when people come to the conference. If you come all by yourself, who are you going to talk to when you go back?
Yep, yep. And if you don't keep talking about these things, you lose
Yes.
the essence. It evaporates.
Yeah, I've already started writing a LinkedIn post about our discussions here. So
Yay.
hopefully I'll get that wrapped up and posted soon.
Is I appreciate the profoundness of that, Tim, because when you think about how much time most of us, if not all of us, have spent talking about the other way of doing things, um, it's no wonder that, we don't give enough attention to this new way of thinking and thus, encourage and enable the transformation. We've talked about the other crap for years, if not decades. It's in us.
For 50 years at least, maybe
Yeah.
longer.
It's in the water.
Yeah, it is the water, exactly.
Yeah, that's true.
Yep. Thank you, David Foster Wallace. Yes.
So the fish are not talking about it.
How's the water, boys?
Why do you think, like, some of the things Deming was talking about in the New Economics just seems like not up for debate, just fact, kind of, like, why is it still contrarian or to the way things are done? It seems like most people would agree that with with almost all of what he's saying, right? It's very factual based. It just feels odd to me that, like, it's like people are arguing that, this,
But
why isn't
but
the sky
what
blue, or,
what
against
are
that.
facts? What are facts in
Yeah, that's the
this day
problem.
and
It's
age?
the fact. If your view is a Deming view, these things are facts. If your view is some other view, they're not facts.
Yeah,
I haven't
worldview is very powerful. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
haven't read it yet, but I encountered a very interesting interview with Angus Fletcher, I think his name is, talking about his book. What was it? Primal. Let me see if I can find it. It was on the latest this week or last week, or I think it was last week's episode of Econ Talk. But it sounds promising as talking about how humans make decisions in the face of limited information.
Oh, yeah.
Thinking,
We look for
thinking
the
fast,
the
thinking
easiest story
fast
that
and thinking
satisfies it,
slow.
right?
No, this isn't Thinking Fast and Slow. This is a new book that's just come out.
Oh, okay.
Still
Let's
sounds
see.
like
Where did
Kahneman
it go?
System 1 and 2.
Primal Intelligence with Angus Fletcher. I'll share a link. This sounded really interesting. The person the guy who did it is research on narrative. It's fascinating. It was fascinating. So
So I'm going to end this meeting and then we can hear a good story.
Yeah.
Thank you all for all the sessions you joined and all the contributions you made. We're all learning still. Sometime I'm going to end up knowing everything.
Sure.
and then the universe will blink out.
Yes.